Night 2 of Neil Simon's appearance on Later with Bob Costas from May 2nd, 1990. He talked again about Lost in Yonkers, which he identified as his most cared about work. He didn't say it was his favorite, but he said it was the one he cared about the most. Someone he did not care about was New York Times critic John Rich. But he did identify some critics that had incredibly positive impact upon his art. Talked about Plaza Suite, his time working in the golden age of television, Your Show of Shows, and Sergeant Bilko, the relationships he built with Sid Caesar, Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner, Larry Gilbert, the guy who went on to do MASH. I mean, he was there when television mattered. It's sort of like, you know, when people get excited about stuff streaming on Netflix, one series. Imagine everything on TV being top-notch, because there were only 3 networks, and they were all fighting and making great stuff. I love 50s television. So, a lot of that in this interview. Again, May 2nd, 1990. Later with Bob Costas and playwright Neil Simon.
Thanks for staying up later. This is our second program with Neil Simon, and we'll just cram as much as we can into this half hour. Is opening night always an exhilarating experience, or is it painful, or some combination? Does it differ from play to play?
Well, in the beginning, it was life and death. I mean, the first play, Come Blow Your Horn, I stood in the back of the theater, which is a normal-sized theater, and I could swear the stage was 4.5 miles away. I said, how can anybody hear anything? It was so frightening to me. I'm not really a drinker, but I went backstage after the first act curtain and I drank whatever brandy. I said, I can't go through this. I will never do this again. The second show was Little Me, and the same thing happened. And I said, this has got to be the end of my career. I just can't go through this. It was so frightening. By the time we got to Barefoot in the Park, the play got off to such an incredible start that I finally enjoyed it. And then we started, after that was The Odd Couple. In those days, it was still frightening because the critics all came to on opening night. That's about 250 seats taken up of 700 seats on the orchestra floor of critics and their wives, girlfriends, friends, whatever. And they don't laugh. They just take notes, they look down at their paper, and they said, oh, God, this is just awful.
Do they really not laugh? Don't they sometimes laugh in spite of themselves?
Well, yes, they do. Occasionally they do, but I've watched a lot of them, and they don't laugh. And they will then write in their paper the next day, one of the funniest plays I've ever seen in my life, and really mean it. Comics are that way a lot. You know, you tell a comic a joke and go, funny. Oh, funny kid, and not laugh at all. So it's recognition, I guess. But then it started getting easier, and then Hal Prince did something. He introduced the preview system of inviting critics to the previews. And so if your play opened on a Thursday night, the critics came on Tuesday night, Wednesday matinee, and Wednesday evening. On Thursday night, when the play opened, the people who came were your friends, the backers, a few critics, not always the major critics, some, a few television critics, but the vote had already been in. So what was nerve-wracking about opening night, now what is nerve-wracking is going to the party and hearing the reviews for the first time. They have already been written 2 days ago, but those first reviews could send you to the hospital, I guess.
And even now, after you've been through it, you don't develop an invulnerability to it. If there, let's say if there are 5 reviews in the New York papers and 4 of them are positive and the 5th one is not, 5th one hits you disproportionately, doesn't it?
Yes, one tends to do that. I remember sitting, going to see a performance of Barefoot in the Park, and it was maybe the best audience reaction I ever got on any play on that particular night. But for some reason, I looked at a man on the aisle, and he was going, oh, God, oh, gee. He was just in torment. And my wife came in the audience, I mean, literally in tears, laughing, and she came over to me. She said, how's it going? And I said, terrible. And I really meant it because I just attached myself to this man. I think a lot of us are prone to do that. You look for the negative because you think that's where the truth really lies. But I'm I'm pretty good about it now. The ones that you get most fearful about are the ones you care about most. In other words, before I even write a play, in my mind I say, if I write this the very best I can, how good could it be? And sometimes you could say, it can only be pretty good. And sometimes you can say, this could be magnificent if I do it really well. It's the ones that you think that can be magnificent are the ones you worry about. The others, you say, well, I just hope I get away with this one. I mean, I tried my best. It's a nice, light piece. It's funny. And that's what usually happens. I worried about Lost in Yonkers because I really cared about it a lot. And that first review that came in was Frank Rich's review, which was, I didn't even understand it. I didn't even really read much of it. But I've had a strange relationship with him in terms of he is critic to me. I don't know the man.
New York Times, for those who live outside New York.
I didn't know he worked for the New York Times. I'm glad you told me.
Have you had conversations at any time, extended conversations with critics?
Many of them.
Are they productive?
Well, they're productive when you're out of town. Elliot Norton, I don't know if Elliot Norton is still there in Boston writing, but he was wonderful. He saw The Odd Couple, and he wrote in his review, he loved the play, but the headline of the review was, "Oh, for a third act." And he was telling me the third act was not working. And so he had a program much like this in which we sat and talked about it, and he said, why don't you bring back those two girls, the Pigeon Sisters? They would be wonderful. I miss them. And I said, that's helpful. And I went back and put them in. It's the reviews you get in New York are not helpful to the play you have in New York. It's only helpful to what you may be doing later on. But you can't outguess the critics. You can't say, if I do this, I think so-and-so will like that. You'll be wrong every time.
You've had very few plays that could be called failures. Star Spangled Girl didn't work. I guess God's Favorite with Vincent Gardenia, not because it was his fault, but I remember because I saw that play myself. Yeah. One of your lesser-known plays didn't work.
Yeah.
What of yours got really belted by the critics, and you were mystified by it because you said, this is really good? And what did better with the critics than you thought it deserved?
Well, it's a good question, and I'm trying to think of the answer. This won't be a direct answer to it. I'll just explain God's Favorite for a moment. I knew going in that God's Favorite was not going to be a hit. I wrote God's Favorite, which is sort of an absurd or abstract version of the Book of Job.
Right.
And this I wrote the year after my wife died, my first wife, Joan. And it was the only way that I could deal, whether publicly or privately, with what I thought was the absurd death of someone 39 years old and so beautiful. And so I wrote this play, and Manny Eisenberg, my producer, backed me up on it and said, maybe we don't have a hit here, but this is what you want to write, and you deserve to be heard. So the fact that that play did not succeed was okay with me because I got what I wanted out of it. A play that surprised me was, despite the fact that neither one of us seemed to like Star Spangled Girl, it was a hit. It ran for a year, and it amazed me. And it does well, but it didn't give me any satisfaction. What writing a play that's not successful does for me is make me want to go right back to work. And the morning after Star Spangled Girl opened and got pretty much panned by the critics, but the audiences still came, but I said, I'm not going to let that happen to me again. And the next morning I started on Plaza Suite. There was like an extra effort. You always think you're putting in your best effort, but sometimes I think the mind works in a certain way to protect your psyche.
In view of your effort for many years now to combine comedy with drama, are you resentful of the lingering impression, not necessarily the consensus, but it's out there somewhere, that he's just a facile joke machine?
Well, you become known for what made you famous, and I think Barefoot in the Park and the Odd Couple certainly were the quintessential plays. And so I remember the reviews vividly: machine gun humor, rapid-fire jokes, which those plays did have. I thought they had some character, too, in the story, but basically that's what we were used to. And when I slowly started to move into the other area, it confused people. And I remember doing a play, The Good Doctor, which were based on short stories of Chekhov, because I had read a short story of his that I just loved, and I wanted to dramatize it, and I did, and said, well, I think I'll just do more of these. and a woman came to see the play, a woman in the audience in New Haven, and she came up the aisle and she said, "This isn't Neil Simon." And I said, "Did you like it or did you not like it?" She says, "I don't know. It just isn't Neil Simon." So she couldn't make up her mind whether she liked it or not. And that's what I was fighting for a number of years. I think Gingerbread Lady, no, maybe the first act, The Plaza Suite, which was a story of husband and wife who were married for 23 years, and he's having an affair with his secretary and ultimately leads to the dissolution of their marriage, was the first time I stepped out. But the audiences were so used to laughing that when we got to Boston, the first act was a serious one. Mike Nichols, the director, said, "Let's start off with a serious one and then go to the funny ones." Well, the audience laughed almost all through the first one. I mean, it wasn't that they were laughing in a derogatory way, like, "This is terrible." They found it very familiar to them, and so they were laughing uncomfortably, but they laughed. So Mike said, "Let's take out some of the laughs so we could get to the drama." So we took out the laughs, and they laughed at other places. So you couldn't stop them. I wanted to take a hammer and say, "No, no, don't laugh at this." Finally, after doing one play after another, I started to move into that direction. Prisoner of Second Avenue, a man who was at that time 48 years old, lost his job. Where is he going to turn to? It was a drama, and yet I mix it with a comedy. It's the way I particularly see things. My greatest fear is to be trapped in an elevator. I was trapped in an elevator once with about 10 people that only should have carried 7 people. I mean, it was the most frightening moment of my life, and it was probably the funniest I ever was because it kept me going. So I think that's where the comedy comes into the drama.
You told the New York Times that in a way you think you're almost demeaned by your success because, I guess, to use a shorthand, if he's that accessible, how much artistic merit could there be? If a guy from Levittown gets it just as well as the critic from the New York Times, how artistic could it be?
Well, I mean, my answer to that, and it becomes immodest because I can't say it and I can't make the comparisons. You say, how good is Shakespeare? He did 37 plays. I mean, they all ran at the Globe Theater. I mean, Charles Dickens was one of the most successful writers of all times during his lifetime. I don't know what the critics said about them, and I'm not using that as some argument against demeaning me because there are plays that I've written that I don't think were first-rate. I don't think Star Spangled Girl is a first-rate play. But I think to become successful and even wealthy as a playwright seems an oxymoron in a sense. I mean, they just don't fit together. Robert Anderson, the playwright, said, you can get rich in the theater, but you can't make a living from the theater. Well, I have become rich and have had and do make a living in the theater. And it's unique in its own way, and I don't quite understand it myself, except that I just go to bat so often. I mean, I keep writing them. I don't want to spend 4 years, 5 years over a play. If I could think of Lost in Yonkers and write it in 3 months, plus all the rewrites, why not do it? So in some quarters I get demeaned, but I've been noticing a trend in these last couple of years with the trilogy, and certainly with Lost in Yonkers, of accepting me more as a serious writer, and yet I don't want them to think that there won't be entertainment in them as well.
What do you recall from your early days working in television? Is there some thread between the Neil Simon then and the Neil Simon who's sitting here now?
Well, I was very fortunate to be working in what they call the golden age of television, because there were some great shows, not that there aren't today, but it was I didn't go to college. I got out of the Army and started writing right away, so this became my 4 years of university. I had the good fortune to work on the Sergeant Bilko show for 2 years. Writing the Sergeant Bilko show, there always seemed to be about 5 more pages on a Bilko show than any other show because they went so rapidly. And it was like writing a small movie every week. The pace was incredible. So there I was learning about films. Then I worked for 2 years with Max Liebman on a series called, I can't remember the show, not the show of shows, that was Sid Caesar. But we adapted old musicals. Best Foot Forward and not September Song, the show that was from Knickerbocker Holiday, where I was adapting other people's works from Broadway, which were great hits, but I was updating them. So again, I was learning about that. But the best thing that ever happened to me was going on to your show of shows and working with Sid Caesar. And for the first year, I worked with my brother on that show, and then he moved to California. But to work with Sid Caesar and Carl Reiner, to learn from Max Liebman, the producer, who had an old world point of view. He came from Hungary, I think, but he brought all of the European culture with him. And the brilliant writers, Mel Brooks and Larry Gelbart and Joe Stein, who wrote Fiddler on the Roof. I mean, almost everybody who came out of that show, Michael Stewart, who did Hello Dolly, they all went on to something.
Carl Reiner was on here a few months ago, and he said that back in those days, when you were sitting around brainstorming, trying to come up with ideas for the show, that you more than held your own in terms of contributing, but you were so shy that he would often have to express your idea for you in the meeting. Is that true?
Well, I came in every morning and I looked for where Carl was sitting. And I said, my life depends on where Carl is sitting, because if I whispered whatever my contribution was to Mel Brooks, he would have just shouted it, maybe taken credit for it. Not that he needed it, because Mel is the funniest man I ever met in my life. But Carl would jump up and say, he's got it, Doc's got it, and repeat, you know, what I just said. And when I heard it, I laughed because I thought it was funny. But working on that show, I mean, to be with that group and to work with Sid, who knew who the best writers were, who took care of them better than anyone, who paid them better than anyone else, who had respect for them. I worked for 2 weeks. Danny and I, my brother, worked for 2 weeks with Jackie Gleason. Never saw Jackie Gleason for those 2 weeks. And when the material that we contributed to with the other writers went upstairs to the White Tower where he lived, the script would come back, slid underneath the door with an NG on it. And that, I mean, it wasn't really nurturing the writers, saying, this is wonderful. Sid was such a wonderful audience for you. And when the thing wasn't right, he would go, It was an interesting way, the way that show was written, because Michael Stewart sat behind the typewriter. I don't know if Carl talked about this, and all the rest of us, the 7 or 8 of us, sat in a semicircle around, and Sid Caesar faced Michael Stewart. And everyone was shouting lines. How about if he says so-and-so, so-and-so, so-and-so? And it was like an auction going on, because Sid would give a little nod to Michael that was undiscernible to us, and Michael would type. And after about a half hour, Sid would say, read back what we have. And we said, you mean we have something? I thought we were all just shouting. And Michael would read back what we wrote, and he put it all together. And so that was the beginning of the sketch.
How hard is it to be funny on demand?
Well, to be funny on demand in that group was not funny, because once you felt your oats, and we all had great respect for each other, and I think great love during that time for each other. You just look forward to doing it. But when I was writing on the Gary Moore show, and I had to write a funny intro for Joe Stafford to sing her next song, I mean, I couldn't come up with anything. I mean, I love to hear her sing, and I love Gary, but that kind of stuff I couldn't write. But writing funny is the easiest thing for me. I can almost always write something funny. I never have trouble with the lines. The lines pour out. It's what it's about that's important, and that's hard, and that's what takes the time.
When you've been in the area of motion pictures, you've never had that full control. Although you've had lots of motion picture successes that you've been involved with, I guess you envy the full control that someone like Woody Allen would have.
I do, but the only way to get it is to direct. A, I don't want to direct, and B, I don't think I can. I don't want to do anything that I know someone can do better than I can, and so I'll never have that control. Even when I worked with Gene Sachs, when he directed the play of Brighton Beach Memoirs, and he directed it brilliantly, he did the film, and I didn't have the control anymore. I mean, it was Gene's film. And so I wish I could have it. I can't, and yet I'll still write films, because sometimes I think of ideas that you can't put up on the stage.
As we speak, the movie The Marrying Man with Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger has been released. But you've distanced yourself from this, right? I
have. It was a bad experience, which has nothing to do with the picture, because I have yet to see the completed version of the picture. It was what Hollywood does now to stars, or allows to happen sometimes to stars, in which they can take over and choose what they want to say, choose what they don't want to say. I only had one run-in with Kim Basinger and felt it wasn't worth my time to stay there and try and fight it out. I got along fine with Alec Baldwin because Alec is a theater actor, and Alec came every day to the rehearsals. She never came to a single rehearsal. And so I told him in the beginning, the rehearsals are for me because I have to learn what it is I'm going to rewrite, because once you start shooting, I can't do it. And so, as I said, what I'm saying now is not necessarily derogatory to the film. It may be a very successful film. I have no idea as we're sitting here now, but it's not the way I like to work. And when I left that film and went to Lost in Yonkers, I felt I was back home, literally. I was working with actors who were saying, Neil, what if we did this, and could I do this, and what do you think, and would you rewrite this, or can I say that? Almost none of that happened, with the exception of the first 2 weeks of rehearsals on The Marrying Man.
Why wouldn't even a young actor or actress, relatively inexperienced, why wouldn't they almost automatically respect Neil Simon's input?
Well, because the people you're talking about come from another kind of background, which is either a theater background or an acting background. I want to act, I want to perform. I think she is a movie star, which is another breed of person. They are electric because of the way they look, the way they come across. She has certain vulnerabilities that are wonderful and work wonderfully in the screen, but I think maybe she felt she could not communicate with me where I could with Alec or any number of the other people.
So in a film like Murder by Death, where you have giant stars like Peter Sellers, Peter Falk, Alec Guinness, David Niven, no problem with any of them.
Oh, I thought I died and went to heaven. I mean, if Alec Guinness said, Neil, I jumped. You know, what is it, Alec? I'll give you anything you want. I did that with everybody. I mean, had the same thing with California Suite, to have Jane Fonda and Alan Alda and Bill Cosby and Pryor and Maggie Smith and Michael Caine. Those were the best days for me, and it's very hard to get that anymore.
You live in New York or coming to town soon? Neil Simon's latest play, Lost in Yonkers, is at the Richard Rodgers Theater. Thanks a lot for these 2 nights. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
We're gone. See you later.
Thanks for watching Cleveland Live Music. It's awfully bright out here. I'd click on another one of my videos. Quit looking into the sun. Your mother told you not to do that. Please hit the subscribe button. And if you want to support the channel more, there's GoFundMe and Patreon information in the video descriptions. Ooh, ooh!